everybody. We're going to talk about the sensory garden. We've had a lot of uh, Zoom sessions in Trellis on each aspect of a sensory garden. So there's an awful lot more you can watch on the YouTube channel to have a look at more detailed elements of the sensory garden. But I'm going to talk in general about how we think about setting one up, either from scratch or maybe just adapting what you have. Or if you only have a small area with pots, you can still think about some of the things you can include as well. So that's the intention. And let's go on and talk about the 5 senses that are accepted as being the ones that we generally think about. There is some talk about other senses as well, but these are the main ones that we can think about when we're talking about how we can develop an area for our groups to enjoy some of these. So we have sight, which is 80% of our senses. Our sight is what we use, but that's those of us who are sighted. And of course, we have people who have limited sight. And so on. So everything can be developed and used differently. Hearing, what we hear, what goes on around us in the natural world or the unnatural world. But of course, that could be limited for some people. Touch, we often touch plants, enjoy them, touch textures. But again, some people might find that uncomfortable. Smell, what's around us, what can we smell? We have flowers, we have the natural world again, leaves, bark, and so on. And of course, taste. So that can be employed in the areas that we are interested in terms of growing fruits, vegetables, and so on, or herbs perhaps. So let's just go into that a little bit more. There is a study by the University of York which has shown that that hierarchy that we have, where our sight comes at the top, is not always the hierarchy of senses that people from different cultures may have. So in the West, generally, sight is considered, if people talk about these things, to be the most important sense. But people from other countries, people who are Farsi speakers, for instance, may react more readily to taste or smell. So if you have a group of people in your groups who come from different cultures, you might have to think about the importance of different sorts of senses other than sight being the most important. So that's just something to think about. We also need to think about, when we're talking about the senses we want to promote or have the facilities for, is that people who can react differently to things. So people who are neurodiverse have different reactions to some of the things that you or I might find something we accept. So sometimes people with autism find very loud noises, persistent noises, quite difficult to manage. So wind chimes is a popular thing for sound in gardens, but the persistence of wind chimes all the time can provoke not good calming feelings, which is what we want to do, but actually irritate people, and people might find it very difficult. So we need to think, obviously, when we're thinking about the senses that we want to promote and what we're doing in our gardens, how people may react. People with dementia need also gentle sensory stimulation rather than very strong stimulation, which some people might enjoy. Sight impaired people may have touch or sound at the top of their hierarchy of important things that are relevant to them. So it's just when you're thinking about these things, obviously, you know your groups and you know how they react to things, and that's important. So when we're preparing to either design a space. If you're lucky enough to have a space, you can design either from the beginning, or you want to adapt your space, or it may be you have a very small space and you're just thinking about pots. But what should you think about first? How do you prepare yourself for doing the right things? So as I said before, what's your hierarchy? What's the hierarchy of senses which are best for your client group and the people you work with? So that's the most important thing. Then from that, you can say, well, what is my wish list, or when you talk to your group and talk to your staff, what is your wish list of what you really want or need in your garden or your space, to adapt it to be a more meaningful space for people? So it may be that you would like to have more places for people to sit, to enjoy nature, to enjoy the smell of plants, to enjoy textures. So that's something you can think about. So you want to make a list of things. Maybe what you need, because you have people in wheelchairs, is actually you need to have more smooth walkways so that people can access your area, or people with sticks and so on. What would be really nice might be to have water, the sound of water, or maybe just the water which would encourage birds and insects into the garden so people could look at them, or water so that people can touch it, or bird feeders perhaps, which also encourages birds into the garden. People can sit and look and be sort of mindful, enjoying watching the birds come and go. Maybe a practical thing like raised beds or planters. Maybe your planters are on the ground and it's not accessible for people to touch. Maybe you should raise them up. How would you do that? Or maybe you could build some raised beds so that people can actually either have that activity of doing gardening, or the ability to touch what is being grown, to pick things, to have taste, and so on. And then if you really are doing a big change to the garden, what practical things do you need? Do you need a shed to put your gardening equipment in? Do you need a glass house where you can actually allow people in to propagate and grow things and enjoy touching the soil, touching the compost, achieving things? A potting up area. Maybe you need a compost heap for your waste from your kitchen, and so on. So prepare yourselves, make a list, have a talk to everybody who's in your group. If you're making a plan, and I think it's always really helpful to have an outline plan of whatever space you have, even if you're not doing major changes, so that you can copy it, draw on it, think about things that are going to fit, working, sort of visualizing on paper the thoughts and the ideas that you have. So a way of doing it is to draw a rough outline, just yourself without measuring, and then go around the space that you have and actually measure the sides properly, either with a long tape measure, a hose, if you have it, a garden hose, which you can then measure off. Or another way of measuring is to measure your pace. So the way you walk so put a tape measure on the ground, put one foot on it, have someone else look and see where your other foot lands. Maybe your pace is, say, 80 centimeters. And you can just pace out the sides and write down the measurements in that way. You can add any features that you want to stay, like you've got trees, you've got sheds that you want to stay, or paths that you can't move. So things like that, try and pinpoint where they are and how that will affect how you're going to change the space that you have. It's always a good idea to find north on a compass. Now, if you've got a smartphone, you have a compass on your phone. You may not have used it, and you can find out which direction north is so that you know how much light, how much sunshine is going to come into your site. You may well know from the experience of just being there that you get the sun in the morning, or you get the sun all day, or it's very shady. So these are things you have to think about in terms of what you're going to put into the garden. And then if you're doing a whole garden change, note where doors, windows, gates, things that will affect where you can plant, where you can put things. you could note them on your plan. So once you've done that, just roughly as a sketch, you could draw it up to scale. So we'll talk about how you do that. So what I'm saying next here is note down those existing features. Once you want to move, perhaps you could put them in green or put the ones that want to stay in situ in red, just so you have an idea of where things are and what's going to be moved. So you can draw up your plan from your rough measurements and your rough plan. You could draw up a proper plan to scale. And that way, if you do it to scale, you can work out the sizes of your paths or the sizes of benches or buildings you want to put in or ponds to scale as well. So it sounds a bit daunting if you haven't done it before, but you could use graph paper and this will help you draw to scale. You can, if you've got a really big garden or really big space, each meter that you've measured can be represented by one square on your graph paper. If it's not as big, 2 squares can indicate a meter. And if it's really a small space, 4 squares can show you a meter on your, from your measurements. So draw it up, and below is a picture of a simple outline of a site, which has just got the line showing the outline of the space, and then lines showing where there is currently, for instance, paving at the bottom, or there's already a pergola there. And then other things that have been added are where there's a tree, so a circle will indicate a tree on the right. The lawn's written in where there are already beds have been written in. So you've got a basic outline of your site. And this is what you can use now to start doing sketches of where you might want to put things. You might want to put a new path in, you might want to put a pond in, you might want to put new seating areas. So you can do this even if you have a very small space, you can still do this. You don't have to, but it's helpful. So from there, how will you design your sensory garden? Where do you start? Well, you go back to your wish list, your list of the things you think would help you make your garden more interesting and more available to people to find their sensory experiences through it. And you can look at your list of priorities. So where do you go? Do you go straight to plants? Do you go to putting in new paving? What comes first? The most important thing when you're designing anything is the thing that's going to cost most, which is normally changing your paving, changing your surfaces, getting more furniture. These things cost more, and especially things like paving or seating areas, patios, things like that, they won't be changed easily. So that's the sort of thing that comes in first. And then the planting choice, or the more different elements that you want to add can come in later. So here's just some simple curved designs, just some simple design layouts. If you're going to change your whole space, you might want some ideas to be there. So the left-hand image is a small garden, back garden, but what you've got in it, and I think this is quite useful for people to have in a space, is 2 areas to sit. So one which is closest to you, maybe with a table, maybe not, doesn't have to be exact, but then another one further down the space in the garden in this case, so people can sit at different ends, especially when maybe you have the sun in the morning at one end and the sun in the afternoon at another end. And maybe you would sit at the end if you were very close to, say, the edible planting area, something like that. There's a reason. So there's a shed at the end of this garden, and that's, they've got seating near to that. A bigger one, which is the image on the right, and ignore the fact it's in German, I apologize. is a bigger garden where you've got bigger spaces and you're able to have a path flowing down from the patio nearest to you through the garden. And I would suggest also that perhaps that path could come back again, or you could follow the same path back. The path also has a bit going off into, again, the planted up allotment style area. So access, easy access for people on smooth paths especially, are really important. If you have a very long site, then you can divide it up in different ways. So you could either use to the left a nice curved path which goes along to through the space and to the back, or you can have, as I've shown on the right, one with diagonals, and it gives you nice big corners in which to plant, so that you can really plant up areas very well. So what's important? It's really important in any garden, especially a sensory garden, that people can access the garden. So most often for people who find their ability to walk or are in wheelchairs limited, smooth paths and seating areas are really important. And the paths should be at least 1.2, more probably 1.5 meters wide, for wheelchairs to be able to access them easily, or having two people side by side. If you have people with limited ability to walk, you may have to walk beside them to help them through your space. So making nice generous paths and making them smooth is really important. Simple routes, if you're going to have a route round your garden, are easily remembered best by people with dementia and people who are not, find it more difficult to locate things. Path areas and areas of seating, especially for people with dementia, are better if they're a light colour. As you can see at the bottom of this picture, the dark colour, which is the wood decking, can sometimes be seen as a void by people with sight problems or with people with dementia. So although it's shown there, it wouldn't perhaps be the best thing for people with dementia. It might be better if the paving, the light colour paving, continued on to the seating area where you're now going to put tables and chairs as well. But for other people, the sense of walking on something different is actually enjoyable and quite fun. So it might be useful if you, say, had a smooth path, that you just did a small side path off to another part of your area, which had something different. So it might have gravel, where you've got the sound of gravel, you've got the feel of gravel under your feet, which is interesting to walk on. Or you might have grass, which again, it's a change of sound, the change of feel. And with grass, of course, you would have to cut it. So the cut grass gives people memories. Sometimes older people or people with dementia might not want to walk on the grass, but they like the smell of the cut grass because it reminds them of when they cut grass or when they were young. And that smell is really important for some people. Or you've got the feel of forest bark under your feet, and you've got the smell of the wood which breaks down. So there's a kind of foresty smell without having to go into a forest or wood. You could actually have that near you. So those are things that people can have as an extra bit. If you've got space to do it, it's quite nice to have those variations of texture and smell and sound. If you've got steps or ramps or you're having to put them in, steps should always be put in with an equal height and depth. So the height is called the riser and the depth is called the tread, so that people have a muscle memory which allows them to anticipate walking up or walking down them. So there's no tripping, or at least not likely to be. So a riser of 6 inches or 15 centimeters is quite normal, and a tread of 12 inches or more is acceptable, especially in a garden situation where sometimes it's longer, but they should always be of the same height. If you have people with visual problems, then marking the edge of the step with paint might help people be able to see where the step stops, and they'd have to tread down to the next step. So that's really quite important. Of course, handrails can be important as well for people to allow them to be independent, but to be stable at the same time. If you're going to have a gradient, you don't want a gradient more than 1 in 12. And again, handrails are also important. And if you have to use decking, you can get, and you can see it on the picture top right, non-slip strips can be added to them so that people can easily go down them, whether they're in a wheelchair or not. So seating areas, which is really important, whatever your space is, however big or small it is, places for people to sit and to be able to take on what is around them and to use their senses to enjoy, experience being there within nature. It's important for people to have quiet, calm areas where they're able to look at the plants around them, the birds or insects in the environment, which obviously is down to your choice of plants too, to ensure that those things are going to be happening. One way of enjoying your environment more is to place the seating you have back into a border. So if you look at this image, you can see that the bench is set with planting all around it. This means that people are able just to lean over the arm rail and touch or smell and feel involved. It's not going to be a problem for them to be able to do that. So it also allows the path to be uncluttered so that people can walk down it easily without having pots. So even if you had, say, a small space, you could move any pots you have beside your seating area. So there's not jutting out and can be a problem as well. You could have seating next to raised beds if you have them. And on those raised beds, you could be growing edibles so that people can very easily, from the seated area, be able to pick strawberries or anything else that you're growing as well. The other thing is that coloured benches are more easily seen by people, so they can locate where it is they're going to sit down. And again, they usually remember that too. So rather than having a natural wood, which of course looks nice, it's a rather dull colour. It's not easily spotted by people to be able to sit. So seated areas are really important to have absolutely more than one, to have different places with different things going on so that people can experience different sorts of senses in different parts of the garden and appreciate the sunshine on their body or the shade from the sun if you're lucky enough to have a nice sunny day. So sounds can be brought into the garden by water, of course. So safe raised water features are probably the best way to go. Of course, you can have ponds, but if you have a pond on ground level, you will have to have some sort of a barrier so that people are made safe from it. Whereas if you do raised water features, they're not too expensive. You don't have to make huge ones, but you're providing a place where you may have the sound of water moving. You can easily get small pumps which use the sun to solar panels, small solar panels. Of course, they can be run on electricity, but it's going to cost money to bring electricity safely into a garden. So solar panels are quite a good way to go. So you can have all sorts of different ones. You can have, for instance, one where you've just got bubbling water But of course, you need to think about, again, is the constant sound of bubbling water going to be a problem for people? So that might be something you can switch on and off easily. Or you just have still water. But if you just have still water, you do have the problem of it getting algae. So another way of having still water would be the picture at the top right, which is a natural pond, which has plants in, and the plants will oxygenate the water and to a certain extent stop algae and problems like that, the water, because they produce oxygen. And if you get a balance of plants, and you can get lots of dwarf plants, there's a picture here on the picture of the top right. There's little lily leaves which indicate a small water lily is in there. It's got all sorts of different plants in, and it would allow creatures to come and go, because the other attractive thing about water in the garden is not only is there sound and touch as you trail your fingers in the water, but also it introduces insects, butterflies, insects, birds, and so on that like to come to the water. Of course, you can have more fancy water features like the one with the jug, the blue one on the bottom left. That gives you sound again, so that hopefully you can alter the sound too. Or you have one with big stones like the picture at the bottom right. Another thing you could add is to get sound and also natural creatures into the garden, so you can look and see our bird feeders in different parts of the garden too. And also in terms of touch, you could provide sculptures to, if you're lucky enough to have anything like that, to have them close by where people are sitting or walking, so they can touch whatever they're made of. And there's another texture that they can touch and enjoy. So planting ideas, moving on to planting ideas. There are many ideas for planting, and this is probably, although you need to know about plants or you need to have looked up the plants you've got, one of the more fun parts of what you're going to do. And of course, you can plant in containers, in raised beds, out into the ground as well. So how do we choose the sort of plants to improve the sensory side of the garden that we're trying to change? First, the biggest plants that you put in are trees and shrubs. And trees and shrubs can be used in all sorts of ways. Trees have bark, and bark can be lots of different textures. So it's a good idea, if you are putting trees in, that you can put them near to paths or near to access points so that people can go and touch the bark. If you've already got trees, maybe think about how people could access them without walking over plants. Maybe you can put in a short path that would lead to the bark, and that can be felt, and that's always really interesting to see. Some are smooth, some are textured, some have flaky bark that comes off. So these are all sort of questions and maybe fun ideas for people to discover and look at. And shrubs too will have different sorts of bark. So it's another thing that you can look at, apart from the actual size of the tree, which obviously is really important to the size of your plot and place. And the sort of leaves they have, because the sound of leaves rustling is another gentle, interesting part of being outside and being in a garden. And maybe having different sorts of trees that provide different sorts of leaves, and the leaves can be picked and used inside to experience texture, because the texture of the leaves is really important. So you have feeling, you have touch of the bark, feeling of the leaves, sound of the rustling in the wind, or the falling of the leaves in the autumn time too, and the change of colour. as well. So there are a lot of things to think about, and those are going to be your big items to have. And of course, you can put the same things into containers. They just have to be large containers as well. Other forms of sound obviously can be provided by tall grasses. You can get ornamental grasses which swish in the sound of the wind, or bamboos. Just be careful that the bamboos you choose are not huge, because they can spread. The smaller ones, or put them again in containers. But sound is lovely when you have the movement of plants. We can move on to scents as well. So you obviously have scent from flowers, from some flowers, not all. Some flowers are not scented. And we know roses are, and we know lily of the valley is, daffodils can be. There are lots of different ones. So that's quite simple to choose scented plants in that respect. And they can be put again by paths or seating. But also, lots of plants have leaves that can be crushed and produce a scent. So I'm thinking of walking past lavender, brushing your hand over cotton lavender, which is another scented one, brushing your hand through thyme, or picking bits and crushing them with your fingers to release scents. And of course, all these plants could, if people cannot go out, be cut and brought in to allow people to have the same feeling as well. And also there's texture. Leaves have different textures. So maybe someone with a visual impairment not only could smell the smell, but enjoy the feeling of touching the leaves. Are they shiny? Are they dull? Are they hairy? Some of the grey summery plants have hairy leaves. Do they have spiky edges, or do they have soft edges? And these are all activities that you can do with people, either in outdoors or indoors. Obviously, as I'd said before, edible plants can be grown in raised beds or containers, so they are easy for people to access if they can't bend down to the ground. And that's often tomatoes, for instance, have almost scented leaves. You can smell the tomatoes as well as you can eat the tomatoes. You can eat strawberries, you can eat raspberries, and so on. The only thing with those, and with all other plants, is that safety is very important. So you wouldn't use prickly or harmful plants. And if you're uncertain about what plants are likely to be harmful, and when I say harmful, it may be that if you cut the sap, you cut it, the sap is milky and can affect your eyes or skin if you touch it. It's a good idea to go to the Royal Horticultural Society, the RHS, which has a good list of plants that are likely to be harmful, ranging from extremely harmful and making you ill, down to just maybe irritating your skin, or spiky plants, or the ones that have spiky hair that might not be good. Very good. You can download their list, and you can always have that just to double check not only the plants you've already got, but maybe any plants you want to choose. So safety vital when any garden is being used by people that are going to touch the plants or use the plants. So what else is important? Colour choice is important, especially for people whose sight is limited, but for anybody. It can be very confusing if you have mixed colours. Some people really enjoy planting bedding, let's say, or anything with a complete jumble of colours altogether, because they think that's fun, which it can be. But I think for some people it makes it more difficult to actually focus on the plants that they're looking at. So some thought about how you associate plants together, what colours you use together, how you use them is quite important. generally bright flowers can provide interest and stimulus. It's fun to look at. Whereas often lighter coloured flowers and soft colours will provide a more calmful environment. So you can have different parts of the garden doing different things. And that's really probably what I'm talking about most, is that don't jumble everything up. Think about maybe a restful area with soft colours and greens. Remember a colour too. So the leaves are important. And maybe other areas where it's bright and they stand out, and that's interesting and fun to look at, makes you feel good. Often for people who find looking at things difficult, bright coloured flowers can be placed in front of larger green leaves, which make them easier to be seen. In fact, old herbaceous borders always used to have a yew hedge or something like that behind them so you could see. And in this case, it doesn't have to be a yew hedge, which is a bit of a big deal. But you could certainly have plants like fatsia, mock orange blossom, things like that, that have biggish leaves, which are mostly green, even if they flower a little, doesn't matter. And then you can place in front of them some contrasting colours, which people can look at and not be overwhelmed by the overwhelmed choice. And again, this can be done in containers too. So you can have a container without a big mixture, but perhaps maybe just 2 colours in it, or maybe even just 1. And of course, containers are good because they can be moved around and they can be planted seasonally so that you get a bit of interest too. So you haven't just got the same things all the time. Some people like the same things because it makes them feel contented and happy, and some people would like a little bit of stimulus by having changes, but those can be controlled by your choice of what you're going to put in. So if you want to have bright colours, you can, and you want to maybe have 2, you can use contrasting colours. We'll look at the colour wheel in a minute. So you can have maybe just 2 things, 2 colours together, which would make it, manageable. Whereas if you're doing calm park planting, using harmonious colours, and again, I'll show you in the colour wheel, which comes up next, and then you can use tints, shades and hues, and that means adding white or adding black. If you were having a painting palette in front of you, how you'd add a bit of white to red and make a pinky colour, and that's still in the same colour variety, but it's just lighter or darker. If you added black, it would be darker. So we'll have just a look about choosing a colour scheme. So you can see the colour wheel is over to your left, and harmonious colours generally use 3 neighbouring colours. So if you looked top right, you would see some purpley colours, and that would be nice. And again, you could use those, as I said, if you used a lighter one or a darker one together, or you can have very bright ones, which might be the yellows and oranges together. But if you wanted, so the harmonious ones, and obviously if you're going for harmonious for calm, you'd be using soft. So you wouldn't be using a bright yellow, you'd be using a soft yellow and a soft orangey colour. Complementary or contrasting colours are found opposite each other. So you can have, for example, the yellow at the bottom left. If you go directly across, it goes across to the purple tertiary colour at the top. And that's quite a nice mixture. Or orange and blue together look good together. Or green and red look good together. So those are, when I'm saying putting 2 colours together, that's what I would look at, trying to just go across the colour wheel and see what's opposite and think those ones go together nicely. They're fun, but they're not too much. And then, of course, you've got what we call the warmer colours, which are on the left, which are yellow-based colours, and the cooler colours on the right. And cooler colours tend to be used for calming areas as well. So these are just some examples of calm coloured planting, and you can see the picture on the left, not only are there soft colours, so there's some soft blues of the hardy geraniums, there's also the soft grey foliage as well. And again, on the top right, soft colours. So you've got a permanent of what's called a phormium, the plant with the long strappy leaves, which is permanently there, which is in a soft yellow, and that's going to mix nicely with the other colours around it. And the bottom, you've got a seasonal calm colour. So you've got forget-me-nots and pink tulips. So thinking about seasonally how things come and go will also give you an idea of what to plant and how things are going to look in areas in your garden as well. I mean, that's a very soft colour, the forget-me-not, and the pink tulip is lovely, but it will go over. That's a spring show, and you'll have to think about what's coming after that if you're trying to keep it in its calm area. So you might have a calm, permanent, hardy geranium there, or one of those plants as well. Bold colours, there we go, just to give you some examples of bright colours. So on the left, the main picture is a Japanese anemone, the pink Japanese anemone with a yellow centre next to a yellow flower, and that's what you've got. That, so it's quite straightforward and simple. It's not going to be too complicated. Of course, it is in the growing season, and it will die down over the winter, but presumably some of your members in the group won't be going out in winter. And then, of course, you've got seasonal colours as well. So in this case, seasonal bright colours of your daffodils and your winter flowering violas and pansies, which are lovely and will last for a short period in the spring. And then you can change it and put in summer colours in your containers or in your bed. So you can have the permanent planting of the Japanese anemones on the left-hand side, which will come up every year and you know they're coming up. And on the right-hand side, you'll have the changeable seasonal planting that you can think about how you're going to do it every year. And then, of course, just some examples of leaf texture, the sort of things that people can touch. So they can be long, smooth leaves, or they can be the diorama, the left-hand top, slightly veined, slightly ripply textures, or the more feathery textures at the bottom of the helichrysum, the plant which has. So you don't need to know the names of the plants. Go to garden centres, go to supermarkets if you're looking for new plants and have a look. It'll be labelled, and then you can check whether that's suitable and not going to be a problem in terms of being harmed if you've got the list as well. So I hope that's been a start. There's masses to learn about sensory gardening. And because Trellis has produced lots of Zoom live demonstration Zoom sessions on sensory gardening in each section, so one on touch, one on taste, and so on, it'll give you more detail on the sort of activities you can do and the sort of things you can put into your garden space as well. So I hope this inspired you and started you off on thinking how you can change your space or change or develop your area to have an interesting sensory garden. So thank you very much.